Central Asia watchers, oh wow. Those of you who are Central Asia watchers here in the room, Fred doesn't need any introduction, but I'm going to give him that short one anyway. After Fred introduces the panel, we'll turn it over to our panelists, and then we'll leave some time for discussion at the end. We're being recorded, we're on the record, so everything that people say in here is fair game. So Fred is already out of his seat, and I'm going to turn the floor over to him.
Thank you very much. Welcome to this joint session of CSIS.
Press the button.
Oh.
No.
Am I audible? Oh. Now it is. Welcome to this joint session of the Central Asia Caucasus Institute and CSIS. The world has become very interesting in the last few years, at least part of the world that many of you in this room focus on. There fundamental changes are underway in Uzbekistan. We published a book on this subject, Uzbekistan's New Face. And in Azerbaijan, Svante Cornell, director of our institute, just published an article, an important article in the American Interest on changes in Azerbaijan, which have been virtually unreported. Very interesting developments there. But particularly dramatic right now is the new presidency in Kazakhstan of Kassymjomart Tokayev. And what does this mean? Where is this a case of fundamental reform? And if so, what's the timetable? What is the agenda? And how will it all work out? That's our subject today. And I want to say just a word about both of our speakers. We're going to lead off with Shavkat Sabirov. He is, in addition to the formal positions that Jeff alluded to, he is in the entire region of Central Asia, probably the most well-informed person in the area of new communications technology and its use by citizens of the region, country by country. It's an extraordinary a piece of research he's been engaged in for some time now. He's a real pioneer. I think this is of great importance to any understanding. You know, no longer can you sit in some office in a think tank or the State Department and pretend to understand what's going on without access to the kind of information which he is pioneering the study of. And then Oskar Nursha. We're very proud that he was a fellow of ours now 12 years ago. In addition to his formal functions, you should be aware that he's very, very competent writer. He did a book on Putin, which is now available is it in English too? Not yet. But it's a very interesting piece of writing. He has followed in his various roles. He has been very consistent in having a very close view not only of Kazakhstan dynamics or even the dynamics of Central Asia as a whole, but also their complex interrelations with all the big powers around them. So these are two real authorities, and it's a pleasure to have both of them here. Jeff, over to you.
All right, thanks very much, Fred. Shavkat, over to you.
Thank you. I tried to be short and briefly, so I keep your time for discussions. At the first, I'd like to thank organizers for inviting us for this event. And I tried to start my presentation from the President Tokayev address to the nations. There are 5 major points at the Tokayev's address. The first one is a modern, effective state. The second one is ensuring rights and security of citizens. The third one is develop an inclusive economy. The next one, new stage of social modernization. And the last one, strong region, strong country. Let's just go through each of them. What does it mean? Modern, effective state. You have to know that the major thing and major idea, the address is political transformation of Kazakhstan. So it means we are expanding new vision, new legislation, new changes in Kazakhstan. So the first one is continue the process party building. The second one is effective citizen feedback. It means that we have to public dialogue, openness, quick response to the needs of the people. The third one is improving really legislations. We need this one after the, I don't know, last maybe 20 years, that we have to be more openness. We have to give to people more freedom to organize meetings or to tell to government what you want to do and how you want to do. The second one, the next one is strengthening the public consensus. It means that the government is looking for consensus with the society. I think this is one of important things of this part. The next one is ensuring rights and security of citizens. What does it mean? The first idea, is that we have enhancing the protection of citizens' rights and their security. So in this case, you can see at the slide, so we have to improve the quality of court decisions, introduce administrative justice, toughen the penalties for sexual violence, problem of poaching, a system fight against corruption. The one is still in Russian, so it means responsibility of the first leader of the government body. And also, as we can see, we're expecting to big reform of Ministry of Internal Affairs. And the last one is establishing combat-ready army based on new concept, increase the prestige of the military service and the material support of the armed forces. Develop an inclusive economy. By 2025, annual sustainable growth of the gross domestic products can be reached 5% or higher. I think this is real, and we can do this. So you can go through the points, and you can see that all changes will cover all fields of our economy. As a first, it's we have to make more effective small and medium-sized businesses. You know, there's a small and medium-sized of businesses is the blood of economy. So we have to develop agriculture industry, fair taxation and sound financial regulations, and also increase of salaries for budget people. It means doctors, law enforcement, and others. The next one is a new stage of social modernization. It means we have to change our education to give more quality to our education, support for institution of the family and childhood, the creation and inclusive economy. So the third one, ensuring the quality and accessibility of medical services. The next one, support of those who work in culture and the arts, and further development of the social support system and development pension system as well. The last one is specific attention to the region. Kazakhstan is the 9th country in the world by the territory, so the region is really important for Kazakhstan development of economy. So we have to improve the efficiency of the local authorities and also reform the system of inter-budget relations, manage urbanization and unified housing policy, and also we have to create infrastructure development. I think this is major things that we have to discuss and just try to find out where is our major things. Thank you. 7 minutes.
Good afternoon. Thank you for hosting us at CSIS. I think Shavkat made a good job presenting all of this stuff, reforms. I think my presentation, I will dwell on implications. Can I? My presentation would be on the implication of power succession for domestic and foreign policy of Kazakhstan. First, I'll start with domestic implications. You see, when Nazarbayev retired from his office, I was walking down the street from my office to home. I didn't know it, and my wife called me saying, "Do you know that the president retired?" I said, "Are you kidding me?" And I didn't believe. You see, it was totally unbelievable. And then I switched on my phone cell, opened a official TV channel, and I've seen an address, and it was, he retired, and why it was unexpected. You see, to be frank, we in expert community of Kazakhstan, we followed the news and we see some features showing that that government, that there were preparations in legislation and in other fields, how the former president put political figures on the chessboard. But we didn't expect that it would happen in March. So my first feeling was a mix of relief and anxiety. Relief because you see since 2006, when President of Turkmenistan, Niyazov, had died, in expert community of Kazakhstan, there was debates and we analyzed several scenarios of power transition, and majority of them were negative. For example, you can see that in 2016, the president of Uzbekistan, Karimov, he died, and this has changed dramatically the whole political landscape. And that is why relief was that we, eventually we made it, because many political analysts inside the country and abroad, they predicted us that there would be a chaos, that after Nazarbayev, Kazakhstan, it will not survive. And that is why on the 9th of March, my first intention was to go to the ATM machine and just to check, will they block any financial transactions? They wouldn't. I see no queues. So I think that everything is working. It's good. So that is why it was a relief, sense of relief. But anxiety was, you see, because of we live in a complex geopolitical environment. You know what is happening in Ukraine after President Yanukovych, he was ousted. So that is why there were many anxieties. What will be our future? Who will be the next president? So that is why, and so we know we should keep in mind also, take into account one issue, that President Nazarbayev, he left his office on the peak of his political power. His power, so it wasn't undermined. He was in good health condition, so that is why, but he early terminated his position, so that is why I think it's also a kind of amazing thing. So he did, so that is why I think that it was a kind of foresighted and wise decision. No matter how good you are, you run the country about 30 years, and sometimes this day will happen when you need to resign. But nobody believed that in Kazakhstan we discussed it, next presidential elections, and we discussed what will be the results of the President Nazarbayev. Will it be 90% of support, or will it be 80% of support? But it was not, we didn't discuss his resignation. And then it looked me like, you see, maybe it resembles me like the Moses Prophet Moses, who made his people free, but who was not allowed to the promised land. So, for me, but when Nazarbayev declared that his successor would be Mr. Tokayev, I was glad. I was glad because of several factors. First, experience. Tokayev, he was for a long time Minister for Foreign Affairs, he was Prime Minister, he was Speaker of Senate, second-ranking person in our government hierarchy, and he was a Deputy General Secretary of United Nations. So he has a good experience. And the second, maybe to be frank, it's kind of guild solidarity. Since 1993, when I was enrolled as a student to the Faculty of International Relations, the whole my life is connected with international relations and analysis of foreign policy. And that is why when I also, for a short period of time, I worked in an analytical division of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and when one of us becomes the president, of course, it's kind of, you support him sincerely. So this is my case, and I voted for Tokayev when we had elections in June. But you see, I think that the main problem of him was that it's a lack of visibility. He was a well-known statesman, but ordinary people didn't know him. The taxi drivers didn't know him. And this was the problem, because he didn't have a kind of his own political face. So that is why, but now we see that situation is changing for the better, and we see that he is gaining more visibility, more popularity among population. But we should admit that during election, that during election process we had a wave of street protest in Kazakhstan. It can be compared with what we're seeing now in Chile, Santiago, because it's not, there were thousands of protesters, but not tens of thousands and not hundreds of thousands. And, but what we see now that the pendulum is swinging back and it's hard to opposition to take people to the streets now. It always was hard, and maybe the main challenge for opposition in Kazakhstan that it never managed to take people to the streets. There are two major pillars of Mr. Tokayev's agenda. The first is continuity of the policy of leader of nation, and the second is systemic reforms. But we should keep in mind that Nazarbayev is not a lame duck to the moment. He still plays a central role. He's the chairman of the Security Council. He's the chairman of our leading Nursultan Party, chairman of Assembly of the People of Kazakhstan, and at international arena, he is honorary chairman of the Turkey Council and Supreme Eurasian Economic Council. So he's a central factor in political stability. Why I'm saying this, you know that in Kazakhstan, in general, as a post-Soviet state, the power transit is a very delicate process. Let me compare Kazakhstani case, maybe you may disagree with me, with, for example, with Chinese formula of power transit. You know that in China, Chinese leaders, they work in three capacities. They're presidents, they're leaders of Communist Party, and they commander-in-chiefs. But there is a kind of gradual replacement. It takes time, and it takes time to become, to acquire all of these capacities. So Tokayev as the second president, he praised himself as a successor and continue Nazarbayev policy. You know, what we see, he's not challenging Nazarbayev, but his policy is look like has a kind of like correction effort. He's also, I see kind of mutually interdependence because Nazarbayev also had to rely on Tokayev because he is a person who is a kind of operator of political change and operator of political stability. So it is about interdependence, not on dependence of them to each other. And gradually he formed his own team and political agenda. Of course, there are many criticisms inside the country. There was no competition in presidential election, that the power transit was managed, that Tokayev is a kind of modern version of Nazarbayev, that political regime was embalmed, that authority has no incentive to establish democracy, that transit is incomplete, and that we have a kind of dual power problem in the country.
That is all true. That is all true.
No, I'm saying that we have critics. So, and I'm writing about this, so, but I'm sharing my own vision, my own opinion. Please, you can take a floor and speak on your opinion. So, but nevertheless, we have many changes. The changes is that we have first president and we have second president, and the power architecture became more complex. It's more about check and balances, the same as in different parts of the world and even in democratic states. So the patterns of political behavior were transformed. And you see, for about, during my my career as an analyst, sometimes even 10 years ago, I made some kind of sharp analysis, government disagree with me, but now I see that after much, atmosphere in the country has changed dramatically. And many ordinary people, many my colleagues, they're more radical than I, and they blame me for being more moderate. Maybe it comes with age, but nevertheless, I'm answering them, okay, you are radical, but where have you been 10 years ago? When I expressed my opinion more openly, more freely on these issues. I didn't see your voice in that times. Political language changing, we have a new political lexicon which comes with a new president, and you see, this is Tokayev has working on two concepts. It's a concept of listening state that authorities should take into account the concerns of voters, and the second, it's a more pluralistic vision that we have different views, but one United Nations, the country. We have still challenges of the power transit. First, that we were the country of the first president who ruled the country for 30 years, but nobody knows how many years Tokayev would be the president. So the question is that transit, I think, is incomplete. We have more things to do towards making our country more democratic. And the question, you know, when Putin comes into power, the main question was, who is Mr. Putin? We have the same issues, who is Mr. Tokayev? Because he's very reserved. He's a former diplomat. And the questions, what is his real agenda? How many years? And what is his real plans for the life and for the presidency? And one more interesting question, who will be the next president after 5 years? Will Tokayev run for the second term, or maybe we'll have another president? So it is still the case that, you know, first point is that both authorities and opposition, that they don't have political experience. Why? You see, we lived in a country which has political system without politicians. We didn't have real political figures. We have like party functionaries or like state figures, administrative bureaucracy, but situation has changed dramatically. It's a new, both for the position and for authorities. And nobody knows how to work in a new atmosphere. So this is the challenge. The second, opposition is also lacks visibility and recognition. One of the problems is that you see, we have different groups in opposition that they want to see different changes. And some groups, they do not seek democracy. They seek power, and they seek another geopolitical orientation. For example, we have a kind of we have a strong pro-Soviet nostalgia. We have a kind of strong pro-Russian moods in the country. So if, for example, if we imagine if they win the presidential elections, which direction the country will go in this case. And this is for you to show, to get some more insights about what is happening in our country in demographic spheres. You see, the general trend is that in 1997, Kazakhs were 40%. And then now gradually what we see, we are moving to, according to the estimates now, we are Kazakhs are 67%. So what does it mean? It means that Kazakhstan at the moment is on the verge of a kind of cultural revolution. Sometimes our official propaganda, maybe Minister of Foreign Affairs, they talk about that we have a kind of more than 130 ethnic groups live in our country. But what we see, we're moving to a mono-ethnic state, to be frank. And a challenge for us that European ethnic groups, they're leaving the country. And the number of Russians who are migrating to Russia, according to my estimates, I see that it's a number of increasing. And maybe in 10 years, Kazakh may become about 80% of the country. And it will totally change the political landscape. So that is why when, for example, and this situation also is new for people. It's new for government how to deal with this. The main pillars in foreign policy is Kazakhstan will continue constructive, balanced, and multi-vector foreign policy. There will be no dramatic changes in our foreign policy priorities. There will be, I think, a continuity, and Kazakhstan will continue to be a reliable and responsible partner in the global affairs. But see, you can see that geography matters. The first visit of newly elected president was to Russia, then Uzbekistan, and to China. All of these are key neighboring countries of Kazakhstan. Next one, it's a new reality in Central Asia. It's a meeting of two second presidents in Central Asia. Second president of Uzbekistan and second president in Kazakhstan. I think that 10 years ago, we couldn't imagine this. The meeting of our presidents on the sidelines of General Assembly with Trump and Kazakhstan will continue to take one of the central, will take part in C5+1 meeting. And you see, during last decade, we are discussing, and with Mr. Professor Starr, we had been seeing the weakening of interest, weakening of presence of the United States in Central Asia. And you can see this is the result, maybe. This is a kind of new trend. We are not at the moment discussing the relations inside Eurasian Union. We can see that it's activity abroad. So this October, it happened that Eurasian Economic Union signed FTA agreement with Singapore, agreement with Eurasian Union and China came into force. We signed free trade agreement with Serbia, and it is expected that we will sign the same with Israel and Egypt. And I think this is also a new trend that just we need to comprehend. I have a meeting with Mr. Karaganov this October. I took part in Valdai Discussion Forum, which is designed specially for Mr. Putin. He meets with international experts. And Karaganov said that Kazakhstan will be one of the countries maybe who maybe will win from this situation, from FTAs agreed, which signed with all of these countries. So maybe one more point is that you see, I'm not old, I'm 42 years, and but I studied in Soviet times. I remember Soviet times, and maybe you noticed that the people of my generation, some of us are more pro-democratic, but in general, the boundaries of what is politically acceptable, they're determined by 80s and 90s. The younger generation is totally different in Kazakhstan, but we have an older generation who rules the country, the generation that is, who is in the age of 60s and 70s, and you can imagine that their mindset totally was formed during Soviet times, and sometimes probably it's, they have a different sense of inner freedom. Probably some of them do not have this sense of inner freedom. And what is happening now in Kazakhstan might seem for them a very, very tremendous change. But I hope that we have advanced young people who are taking Western education, and they're totally, sometimes I think that they totally do not have respect for power, and they're more free, and they freely express their opinion. And I think that maybe in some years we will come and that we'll create a more democratic states. But at the moment, we should keep in mind that the situation in Kazakhstan is very delicate, and I think that we have still have a long way to go. So, thank you for your attention. I'm ready to answer your questions.
First of all, I was very glad to hear you say that 42 is not that old. Before we open it up to the audience, let me just throw out a couple of thoughts and get your response. I know you said that one of the big questions is, who is Mr. Tokayev? And I think that's certainly true. At least in the West, he did not have much of a profile before he was named President Nazarbayev's successor. But I think there's another question too, which is how much authority does he actually have? He was, after all, the handpicked successor. President Nazarbayev, as you pointed out, or former President Nazarbayev, as you pointed out, still has a significant role in his capacity as head of the Security Council and with the Nursultan Party. And as we've seen just in the last week or so, some new decrees, legislation, giving former President Nazarbayev effectively veto rights over certain appointments. And that can be interpreted, I suppose, in different ways. But I think it does raise the question of how much authority does President Tokayev have? How much of his own person and his own leader is he? And does this speak to some tension, perhaps, between either the two men as individuals or between the policy ideas that they have? And then the second thing I wanted to raise, we mentioned the protests that accompanied the transition a little bit, but I think one of the big underlying drivers of those protests was frustration at corruption. And that's a problem that's obviously not unique to Kazakhstan. I think it's fundamental to the protests in Chile, protests that we've seen in Russia, and in a number of other countries as well. But to the extent that corruption is a source of public frustration in Kazakhstan, what steps are being taken, what steps should be taken to address that problem so that Kazakhstan doesn't end up going in the direction that a country like, say, Chile has done? And do you think that that's a possibility or something that it would be reasonable for President Tokayev to do?
Thank you for being delicate. You see,
well, we have a big audience here. I'll let them.
You see, in my country, we have a strong debate. Some of my colleagues, they insist that we have that we are in the situation of dual power. But a friend of mine, for example, Dosam Satpayev, he expresses this freely. It's his position. You see, I don't agree with it because, you see, first of all, everything depends on health status of Mr. Nazarbayev, I think, in the country. The second issue is that I can compare this situation, it was on my picture, with two soaring eagles in the sky, maybe a kind of two heavenly bodies which are at the same time in the sky. But we should keep in mind that like a sun and moon at the same time in the sky. But first heavenly body we are between sunset and a moonrise. Maybe on the contrary. You see, it's not dual power. It will not last a long time. You see, and to my mind, this formula for power transit is optimal for Kazakhstan at the moment. I know that you may tell me that that you are lacking democracy and so on, but I see that let me compare situation with Uzbekistan, whose president died in 2016. It changed dramatically the landscape. And you see, maybe there was an influence to Kazakhstan, to a political elite that elite is not interested in chaos in the country. And for me, it was a relief because they have solved the issue. Nazarbayev deliberately resigned, and his control plays a role of a kind of stabilizing factor. Why? We have a clash of different elite groups in the country. And I know that position of Tokayev may be confronted by different groups, elite groups, who has their own vision of who can be a successor. This is the first. And the second, we, for a long time, we're afraid of interference from outside actors in our electoral process. And some foreign experts, they openly tell us that after Nazarbayev, that your country will be that next president could be a nationalist or could be like extremist, a political radical, and if this happens, we would enter the troops. And it was openly declared, you see. So that is why I think that for the moment, Nazarbayev, it's not an arbitrary role, but he's still a stabilizing factor. Maybe for this transit period, as I said, I think that transit is not finished. We are just in the process, and we need more time, first of all, for themselves. And what I see, you see, I was afraid that because of lack of this visibility and recognition, that Tokayev would have many obstacles, but he's doing a good job, I see, and I think he's gradually gaining this popularity. So that is why maybe this is my answer.
Can I add?
Sure.
Political counselor of the president Tokayev, Mr. Karin, just gave interview to Radio Freedom, Radio Zatik, just yesterday, and he just explained and he just answered for all questions of freedom of radio. That the first, we have a constitution, and according to constitution, president has the highest power in our country. So you can find all answer from this interview as well. Regarding protest and corruptions, I agree. Yes, we have for the last year we have a lot of protests and meetings during the holidays, president elections day, but still it's for us it's really new understanding, because we have 28 years of independence. We have to understand what's going on with protests, with the meetings. We have to see how it's going. Of course, sometimes protest is going more fights with law enforcement, but still, this is our life, and we try to learn and to do everything as in a general democratic country. What about corruption? I think that after our years of independence, we've made huge step. We don't have a corruption at the low level because we have e-government services. So all major services provided just online. So we don't have any corruptions as we have at a low level. Of course, we have some cases of corruption on the high level, but still we have all cases public through the media, and you can see what's going on in Kazakhstan.
Okay, well, we have a good-sized audience, so I'm going to open it up to questions. Please wait for a microphone to come around. When you get one, please identify yourself, please be brief, and please ask a question, which means something that ends in a question mark. So, okay, right here.
Good afternoon. I'm Sergey Duvanov. I'm from Kazakhstan, journalist. Я буду по-русски, извините, я плохо владею английским. Мне помогут, да? Ну, я начну с того, что мне понравилась тема, которую здесь начали в отношении независимости Токаева и Назарбаева. Ваше сравнение их с Солнцем и Луной – отличная иллюстрация реальной ситуации. Да, Назарбаев – это Солнце, а Токаев – Луна. И Луна светит только пока светит Солнце. В лучах Солнца светит Луна, но не наоборот. И нет никакого паритета, здесь не может быть равенства. Это моя точка зрения, но вопрос не в этом. Конечно. В этом мероприятии прозвучала ключевая фраза «новые реформы». Если есть новые реформы, значит, были и старые реформы. И мы знаем, что в течение 30 лет в нашей стране проводились реформы президента Назарбаева. Реформы Назарбаева не сделали ничего, на мой взгляд, чтобы страна стала демократической. Предполагают ли новые реформы отказ от курса прежнего Назарбаева? Это мой вопрос. Если да, то в чем расхождение этих реформ, старых и новых? Если нет, то что тогда в них нового? Это мой первый вопрос, пожалуйста.
Okay. So, do we need to translate? Okay. So he was asking about the...
No, she can translate.
Oh, okay.
I can translate very quickly. The comparison that you made between Nazarbayev and Tokayev being the sun and the moon is very relevant and reflects reality in what's happening in Kazakhstan right now, as Nazarbayev is the sun and Tokayev is the moon, but the moon can only shine a reflection of the sun's rays and cannot exist without the sun. And the first question that Sergei raised was regarding the new reform process that was mentioned. We're all familiar with the old reform process, which was implemented by Nazarbayev for 30 years, but did not create a democratic country. Does mentioning a new reform process mean a departure from the Nazarbayev way? And if so, how so? What are the differences? And if not, what do you mean when you say a new reform process?
Можно сразу второй вопрос?
Step by step.
Yeah, пока один вопрос хватит.
Yeah. Let me just explain what does it mean, old reforms. If we don't have old reforms, Kazakhstan expected to be as Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan or as Uzbekistan. All reforms just brought to us what we have right now. Kazakhstan is the leader of Central Asia. We have economy. We have strong taxation. For example, in Kyrgyzstan, over 25% of GDP falls to shadow economy. So it means the cash economy. In Kazakhstan, we, let me say, have just less 1% of the shadow economy. So for us, the last 28, it's everything were done just with old reforms. If we don't have any reforms, we can do nothing the last 28 years. So for new reforms, we are expecting new reforms. We are expecting new reforms in legislation, in really legislation. We are expecting new economy and with small and medium businesses, etc.
Let me add a
okay,
few words.
yeah.
You see, first, I think I want to say thank you to Mr. Duvanov for his whole activity during the last 2 decades. And you see, if I'm, and by the way, it is Mr. Duvanov who, through Skype, has organized recently a debate between Ablazov and between former councillor of Nazarbayev, Yertspayev. I heard it with great interest.
The first in our history.
But and I want to ask Mr. Duvanov, could this happen 5 years ago? Couldn't. Another issue, I'm trying to read what Mr. Duvanov is writing his post. I think it was a good point. He said that the end of Nazarbayev era will lead to the end of all old opposition. They're also departing the scene. It's also a trend because we have a kind of a generation change. A new generation comes to power, to the authorities. At the same time, a new generation of opposition comes. And maybe, maybe we are not successful in building a democratic state because the former generation of opposition, they didn't succeed. They were unable. And I hope that a new opposition will lead country to a more democratic state. But you see, nobody will give you a power just for granted. Nobody. It's a struggle for power. You should fight. You should. Power is not given, just take it. You should take it back. So this is the case. And we have a new democratic movement. We have brilliant young people like Oyan Kazakhstan and so on. But you see, but they are lacking one interesting thing. They are lacking experience, which is missing. You see, old generation of opposition, they faced many difficulties, they faced special unhealthy attention of law enforcement bodies. And the new wave of the opposition, they, at the moment, what I see, they cannot stand the pressure. If they see a pressure, they're leaving the scene. So this is the problem for them, because this gap between all the opposition and you should be filled. But of course, we need a more active opposition, but who will behave in a constructive way, who will behave in a legal field. This is my point.
Okay, in the back.
Hi, Alex Sanchez, James Defense Weekly. Question about Kazakhstani foreign policy, specifically Kazakh-China relations. Kazakhstan remains a vital part of the Belt and Road Initiative. However, just in September, there were protests in Kazakhstan against China's influence in the country. Moreover, apart from, we all know about the re-education camps in China, where thousands of ethnic Kazakhs remain imprisoned. What do you think, what has President Tokayev done about this situation, and what do you expect him to do as well when it comes to bilateral relations? Thank you.
You know, this is a really good question, and everything what's going on with China and Kazakhs, which has in special places, just decided between two countries. So it means between Kazakhstan and China directly. As I know, the last meeting, Minister Atamkulov and Minister of Foreign Affairs in China was 4 months ago, and after that meeting, we've got about 5,000 Kazakh people from China to Kazakhstan. And also we have a special program, Oral Man, which means that the Kazakh people over the world can come back to Kazakhstan as a native country. So everything what's going on between Kazakhstan and China, which related Kazakhs in China, it's doing between two countries, and also this kind of works love silence. So we try to do in Kazakhstan all works just between two countries.
Okay, Bill.
Thank you. I'm Bill Veal, President Emeritus of the U.S. Kazakhstan Business Association, which I ran for 15 years. I want to raise the topic of corruption, which the panel raised. At the recent IMF fall meeting, corruption was a focus for a full day of issues. And one of the proposals being made there was that public officials disclose their ownership in private entities. And talking informally with them afterwards, this information would, among other things, go into a database which would be accessible for foreign investors who always have a problem coming into a country like Kazakhstan or other countries in Central Asia of figuring out who owns what when you want to make a deal with someone. I'm wondering, especially noting that there's a new IMF office to be set up in Kazakhstan, if there's any proposals, any currency, any opposition focusing on this theme and what its prospects might be. Thank you.
You see, I think corruption is one of the major problems on the agenda, and I know that the fight with corruption is one of the key priorities of the government policies, but sometimes our population sees it as in a declared, like a more declarative way. But you see, we have a good record of public of state figures who are sentenced for corruption, and their number is increasing. Even ministers, deputy ministers, it became a kind of ordinary thing. But also this shows the scope of corruption. I agree, and if we want to become a stable and developed country, we should fight with corruption. But you see, I think in general, it's not only government. In general, our society is sick with corruption, because it starts from the bottom, on the ordinary level. Even sometimes I see the attempt of students to give a bribe to solve the issues. You see, it's not Tokayev or Nazarbayev has ordered him go and suggest a bribe. It's kind of, I think, in general, our society is ill with it, but we understand that. I think that the fight with corruption is also one of the priorities of Tokayev, and I hope that it will be a real fight. And as far as investments are concerned, of course, the rights of investors, we have in Astana a special court created for
Based on Great Britain law at the Astana International Financial Center. So it's investment guaranteed by Great Britain law with judges from London and over the world.
So we need to bring good standards.
I think it's going to be a really interesting experience. Inside Kazakhstan law, we have a specific zone with, which will be controlled by Great Britain law.
I think this is a question of mindset, and it should be changed, of course, I agree.
Okay, right here.
Thank you for organizing this event. My name is Olja Shaykenov. I'm a citizen of Kazakhstan. It's a very interesting topic today. Wanted to touch a few points. Number one was, who's Mr. Tokayev? If you're wondering who's Mr. Tokayev, he's just like Medvedev. So he's a puppet. He doesn't make own decisions. Also, about the corruption. Corruption does not start from the bottom. Corruption starts from the top. For an example, son of Mr. Tokayev lives in Geneva and owns an oil company in Kazakhstan. Didn't work a day in oil company. So probably we should start there. Two questions. Since the latest election, number of the political prisoners increased by 8 and now equals to 21. How can you comment on this? Also, during and after the election, 677 peaceful protesters were detained and tried at night. This method was used in 1930s during the Stalin oppression, where you would be arrested at night. They will come in to you at night, and your trial will be at night, so nobody can see, and you'll just disappear. So these practices were started again in Kazakhstan. Why does Tokayev, as a former UN top representative, not implemented the recommendations of United Nations, especially for the cases of political prisoners as Max Bokayev, Iskander Irimbetov, and Mukhtar Jakishev? 25 of 32 UN recommendations and decisions are ignored, as reported by human rights organizations, which is down the block from here. So, thank you.
First part of the question. First, I don't agree that Tokayev is, that you compare him with Medvedev, because in case of Medvedev, we see that he then was overplaced by Mr. Putin, who came back to power. But in case of Tokayev, Nazarbayev is not going to return to power. So no, but I think that I already gave you an answer, my vision on this. And the second issue, you see, I met several government people during this time, and they really have concern over the way the law enforcement bodies reacted. The question is, I think that this is a kind of trained reaction, and they don't have experience to react in other way. I think that need more trainings, how to react. You see, this situation is totally different at the moment. It's a new atmosphere, and I think that the government, and as well as security and law enforcement bodies, they should learn how to react in another way. As I know, at the moment, we have a legislation on peaceful assemblies. It is under revision now. And several points will be revised, as well as the right for meetings is peaceful. We see the changes, but I think, but we need time also. And this, I think, we need a more dialogue, open dialogue, dialogue between opposition groups and the government. Otherwise, it's not a unilateral, it's bilateral process. As I said, nobody will give you it just for granted, just as a part of a kind of like political agenda. Everything should be taken through the dialogue. And I think, thank you for this question. I think you may address, we have a new movement, but what I said where they cannot, about our younger people, our younger generation of opposition, when they face a kind of hard response, instead of living in the country, instead of fighting for their rights, some of them, they do prefer to leave the country and to broadcast from abroad, try to broadcast from inside the country in a new political situation. This is the case. You see, we know Mandela, we know many different examples. You see, our country needs a strong leader. Let me answer. I mean, I wish Tokayev would become a strong leader. This is my wish. And you see, and I wish one day one of the leaders of opposition could come into power, but he should be. It shouldn't be a function. It should be a strong leadership. Only strong leader could run the country. It can manage this country, you see.
Okay, really quickly, I'll let you follow up.
When you mentioned that there is no strong political leaders, two opposing political leaders were killed. One of them, Altınbek Sarsenbayev, he was killed. Zamanbek Nurkadelov, he was killed. How can you say that there is no opposition or there are no leaders and there is no visibility? Because if you came out, you'll be killed. So for instance, for me just speaking out right now, maybe in a few days, I will get a visit. My family will get a visit from special services from Kazakhstan, and they will be pressured. My relatives will be pressured, so I'll be silenced. And when you mention new organizations as Oyan Kazakhstan, they are opposition groups that were created by special services as the just advertisement, PR, just show that we have opposition, but it's not true, that their leaders are controlled by special services. They say only certain things. They cannot criticize the government, they cannot criticize the relationship with China, attempt to sell the land to China, and every agreement between Kazakhstan and China, it is secret. Public doesn't have an access to those agreements.
Okay.
Can you comment on this?
What I'm saying about is that there is no unity among opposition. Different opposition groups, they cannot talk to each other even. This is the problem. If we have a more united opposition that can set an agenda, I think that opposition could get better results. For example, let's take the case of, for example, Mr. Kosanov. Where is he at the moment? he took the second place at our elections. I met him at the airport this day, and he was upset, and he told me that I was not familiar with him before this meeting in the airport, and I asked what had happened. And he said me that he didn't expect his results. He said that he would gain only 7 and 8% of voters. And he said, my belief was that I will get 7-8%, and now he's blamed by the whole opposition. They see him as a traitor, that he betrayed. Many friends of mine voted for Kosanov. They voted for him, but now it's kind of, he became a kind of victim of the situation, because neither government nor opposition is going to work with him. He totally disappeared. But how can a person who took 16% of voters, how can he disappear? This is the case. He could still play a role, I think, in our political situation. At least he made a good job. He gave opposition a legitimacy. Maybe it was the first time in our history when authorities admit that opposition won many votes in different regions, and they took 15 or 16%. You see, but it looks now. You see, there is a good novel of Guy de Maupassant. I know how it's told. About one young girl who saved the life of a person who accompanied her, but then they treated her in an indecent way. So.
Okay.
Thank you to CSIS for, again, another wonderful thing. Fred Starr for the introduction. I'm Mark Stuckert, retired OPIC, used to head the Asia region for OPIC, Political Risk Insurance. And Transparency International has called China the biggest exporter of corruption in the world about a year ago. And we have lots of businesses, lots of contracts being done with China in Kazakhstan, the Belt and Road. We have some estimates of as many as 250,000 Chinese, many of them illegal in Kazakhstan. We had the demonstrations against China with leasing agricultural lands in Kazakhstan. We have Kazakhs imprisoned in Chinese so-called education camps, along with many Uyghurs. Kazakh also has Uyghurs who have families across the border, again, family members in these prisons. How will Tokayev deal with all this? The relationship with China, he made the trip, as you point out in your excellent presentations. And my question specifically too is, what is the budget for investigations of corruption? And is that going to be increased in Kazakhstan?
As far as budget is concerned, to be frank, I don't know. I'm unaware. But another, you see, during Valdai Forum, Tokayev, he made a speech at the panel, and other players at the panel were President Putin, President of Azerbaijan Aliyev, and King of Jordan, and the President of Philippines, Duterte. And Tokayev was asked a question by one of, maybe, I don't remember, was it moderator or was it one Russian expert? He asked Tokayev how Tokayev manages to develop simultaneously ties with Russia and with China. I thought that he expected the answer that maybe Russia is more important for us, but the answer was that that China is one of important partner for us, and that Belt and Road Initiative, as well as Eurasian Economic Union, both these projects that they can develop in a synergy. And as I see Chinese experts, I talked to them after this panel, and they were glad. They were glad, and that Tokayev showed a kind of it was a jest of multi-vector policy towards them. And as I see, you see, Chinese directions, I think it's important for us. First, it is because of geography, because of security matters, and from the point, as far as trade is concerned, we need Chinese corridor, it's my point of view, to diversify our trade opportunities, because we cannot allow our trade to be monopolized only by a North corridor. That is why, for a long time, I think Nazarbayev and Tokayev, then they doing a good job in dealing with China, but we also need one more corridor to the south to diversify both of these at a new stage. You see, will it be Afghanistan or Iran? Maybe through Caspian Sea, but we need a third corridor. But the situation in Xinjiang region, of course, worries me. And I don't have much information of this, but in general, this question can be divided into two issues. First issue is, you see, the issue is that they are citizens of China. And when other countries raises this issue, even Kazakhstan and our neighbors, the answer of China is its interference in our domestic affairs. All of them are Chinese citizens. This is the case. Another part of the problem is that, you see, we're interested in ethnic Kazakh for them to come back to their homeland. And it's a part of our strategy. And you know that before, in Kazakh, the term was Oralman, it means repatriates. But Tokayev suggested to rename and to name them as a Khandastar. It means that we share the same blood. It's showing his that he cares. And some of them, you see, they are not refusing. It's difficult. They are not refusing Chinese citizenship. They comes to Kazakhstan and takes our documents. And Chinese part sees it as a kind of that they breaks the rule. It's kind of fraud, and some of them was sentenced for this. Another part is the camps. It's a different story. But as Shafkat said, you see, I know about that U.S. imposed sanctions on China for breaking the rights of minorities in Xinjiang. But Kazakhstan is not the United States. We don't have such kind of international weight. In dealing with China, I see that our Ministry of Foreign Affairs prefers diplomatic talks. Because if you make many things open through the media, it can worsen the things. It can make Chinese side, on the contrary, it would worsen the position, negotiation position. So that is why maybe when Shafkat said that many things, that diplomacy loves keeping something in silence, maybe it's also a kind of diplomatic tool to protect the interest. And you know, and Chinese side is working with us. Some our Chinese citizens of Kazakhstan, they were released. But nevertheless, I think that maybe I think that, for me, I think that attention from the United States, in general, that international attention to this issue is needed. It would help to make this situation. I think we need the openness, but for Kazakhstan, it will be much more difficult. That is why we prefer diplomatic talks, because some things comes in a in a pocket, because we have a wide range of talks with China, and we cannot ignore Chinese policy. We cannot worsen our relations on these issues and leaving other issues unresolved. So that is why I think the answer is that international attention will help. At the same time, we prefer to make it through diplomatic talks.
And let me add just small thing. China built information corridor, China to Pakistan, and spent over $60 billion for this corridor. Right now, China is going to build information corridor, China, Kazakhstan to Russia. And also, for example, the first step, China is going to spend about over $100 million to build data centers, and using Kazakhstan as a transit country, because the road Western Europe, Western China, it's about 5,200 miles. Could you imagine 5,200 miles? So in this case, you have to build also all infrastructure. How many money it takes? So, for example, when Huawei right now is going to spend $100 billion in Russia for R&D, and also China, Russia, and India is going to create own root server system. It means independent internet. But Kazakhstan inside of this field. We are inside. We cannot move out or just to block or stop everything. We are transit country, so we must to be inside.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
So we are out of time. I'm afraid we have to wrap up, but I want to thank you all for coming and for asking some good and pointed questions. Let's give our speakers a round of applause.